Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome once again to the East-West Connection Wrestling Podcast. I am John Sig. KG is with us also. Up, down, left, right. We're still figuring out the bugs of this thing. But what are we, like months in, and we're still figuring out who's on what side?
I think you're over here. I'm pretty sure.
I think he's right here. Anyway, got a fun show for you this week. We're looking into the history and some of our favorite wrestling video games. So it's a little more random. Another one of those mishmash episodes, and then we're going to get back into some stuff that we've been talking about for next week. But we'll get into that later on. KG, how you doing this week?
I'm doing good. Excited for this this week's episode. We got a cool thing coming at you this week. Cool theme.
For sure. I think it goes along like with our music episode from a couple weeks ago. It's going to be along those same lines. It's going to kind of look at the timeline of things and some of our favorites, some of our favorite games throughout the years. So, where are we going to start off? What do you got for us?
So as we take a look back at our favorite wrestling games here, of course we still like to play our video games, Xbox One, whatever it might be. Maybe not as much as we used to with some of these games. But they were still, deserve to be mentioned back. And of course, what we are dealing with now is a little bit different. But we'll start off things from 1987, WWF Micro League Wrestling for Atari. It had Hulk Hogan on the cover. Didn't actually play the game, so I can't give too much background, but this was the first WWF video game, so this was pretty groundbreaking for Atari. NES was just starting to kick off following 1987 release of Micro League Wrestling. Also went along with the Micro League Baseball games that were released for Atari back then. 1989 WWF Wrestlemania for NES also had Hulk Hogan on the cover. Definitely played this one. This one was pretty fun. I remember you could like regain stamina or regain power by like different guys. Like I remember the Honky Tonk Man had a guitar and the ropes you could get. Did Andre have like a turkey leg or something that you could get? Do you remember?
It was like an oversized foot. I always thought it was just like an.
Oh yeah, he had the foot. He had the foot. Yep. Bam Bam had the flame.
Yep. Yep. No, it was a unique little aspect to it, but that was probably my first wrestling game as well. The animations looking back now are just so horrifically corny. Everyone looked the same except for their hair. This is the color of the character essentially. But yeah, that was we've definitely come a long way in terms of graphics and gameplay in just a few short years here. So.
Yep, I believe the Macho Man was in the game. I want to say Bundy might have been in the game as well. It was pretty fun. I enjoyed it. I remember looking back at it. Also around that time, I also had for Nintendo NES was 1989's release of WCW Wrestling. Don't remember too much about the game. I remember Albert was in the game, Ric Flair, Kevin Sullivan, the Road Warriors. Obviously, like I said, were on the cover. Don't remember too much about the game. I want to say it was slightly better than WWF because you had a little more playability. You could kind of you could do more things. I think you could go outside of the ring, which you could never do in the first WWF Wrestlemania. So it was a pretty fun game. I did own that game. That brings us to 1991. Now, 1991 was pretty groundbreaking. It's kind of a staple of the arcade games. After time, no more really video arcades are kind of gone now. But 1991 Wrestlefest. How about that? I think you know a thing or two about that game.
Sure. Actually, I owned the cabinet at one point in my college years. It's since been floated around between a bunch of the friends of ours. But I'm having a new cabinet redone, which will have playability for everything from NES games all the way to arcade and some N64 and PlayStation games. So I'm looking forward to having that back in my possession. But no, WrestleFest was a super fun game. My memories of this cabinet game were going to the old skating rink on our school field trip days and just not even giving a crap that we were in the skating rink. Everybody else is rolling around and having their fun. And I'm just in the little arcade popping quarters, But that was a super fun game. Good roster, too, for an 8 or 12 man roster. They had a good selection, a variety of characters. They each had their own moves. Whereas, going back to like those Nintendo games, it was very punch, kick, body slam. Like everybody had the same move set.
Yeah.
Maybe they had a finisher. If you were lucky, Hogan's big leg drop was like the unique move of the game. But no, so there was a variety in the move set. And, everybody had their own style. So yeah, that was definitely a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember watching when you could have the little promo style with Mean Gene and the Legion of Doom. It was like, oh my God, take a look at these graphics. It's like groundbreaking stuff. Of course, we got to enjoy the game at college, which was pretty cool. We didn't actually have to put quarters in it, which was even more cool. We didn't have to fork over money, but we should have done that. We should have had like a tournament and like had people do money and then collect it.
Maybe I'll do that with my new one.
Yeah, we should have. We should have got. I feel like we should have got a little more use out of it, but it was still fun. Okay, so that brings us to 1992. 1992, WWF Wrestlemania for the Sega Genesis. I played this game a lot. I think it was also for Super Nintendo, if I'm not mistaken. And it was cool about around this time too, and also with the Royal Rumble game, which I'll get into in a minute here. But the game was a little bit. The rosters were different, so you could have like one game might have Yokozuna on it, but for NES, you had Lex Luger or something like that. So it was kind of cool. You could get different rosters, but this was more of an arcade style. So you got to remember Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter was out, so it kind of went along with that around this time frame. But I remember playing the game a lot. You could also have different guys had different moves. Like Razor had the razor for his arm. It was very much arcade style,
Oh,
but it was pretty groundbreaking at the time as far as graphics and wrestling game.
right. What you have to keep in mind is that pro wrestling as a video game, it's kind of a different genre altogether because you can't simulate a wrestling match unless you do like what we do now that we're adults. We go in and we try to have a good match, so we give and take with each other. But for video game purposes, you just want to win the fight, win the match. So it kind of had to be that Mortal Kombat slash Street Fighter style. So that it definitely differed from that, like you said, from that version of gameplay style, and it lent itself to the fighter games more than an actual wrestling game. But as we'd see later on in years, like the WWE franchise would actually have like a storyline, general manager mode, things like that, where they tried to get more into the backstage aspects of wrestling. But at this time, there was no such thing. Kayfabe was pretty much still alive and well. So a wrestling video game was a fighting video game for all intents and
Right.
purposes. So
Yeah, this was more of the button mashing style game. But the cool thing about it is they had the same creators as NBA Jam too, so you kind of got that same kind of look. NBA Jam, of course, a classic game growing up as well. I believe that was Acclaim that put that out around that time. 1993, we have WWF Wrestlemania for the Sega Genesis. I got it right here.
Royal Rumble.
This actually is the copy that I owned. You could play as The Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, Crush, the Narcissist Les Luger, Shawn Michaels, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Razor Ramon, Macho Man Randy Savage, the Model Rick Martel, Papa Shango, Bret Hart, and IRS. I remember you could use a chair in this match in this game, so that was kind of a big deal to
Yeah,
have a chair on there.
right. I believe you could also choke until the 5 count. You had to let go, or the ref would DQ you. Um, Stuff here as well. Kind of followed the mold of its predecessors of Nintendo and Super gameplay. But it was fun, and it kind of I think it was along the same lines as the not the WrestleMania the arcade game, but the Super WrestleMania that was also out a few years earlier. It was essentially just an updated roster, but still that same look, same feel to that game. But no, this was the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo years, so the graphics were better than what we had known in the Nintendo days, but still had a ways to go in terms of visual appeal.
Right, and I think to piggyback off that, they came out with 1996's In Your House, kind of the same kind of style. Um, I don't remember that one so much, but we're getting into the Attitude Era, so now the games are going to be coming out every year. This time period, they really weren't. They came out maybe every year, every other year, sometimes 2 years between games or different releases. And we're just going to stick to mostly the games that we've played. Also, we know like New Japan came out with a gazillion games. Obviously, we didn't play them, except for kind of like the Fire Pro series. But we could talk about that a little bit more. But before we get into that, I mentioned the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era 1998's release of WWF Warzone. There it is right there. You could see Stone Cold Steve Austin on the cover. And I remember getting this game just about exactly when it came out. And I was so pumped for this game. I was so blown away by the graphics and so blown away by the gameplay. And I believe did this have a little mini story mode?
I'm not 100% sure on that one. I know as we got to the later years, they would start, but no, same for me. I remember if it wasn't a midnight release, it was definitely like the morning of. Like I was fortunate enough that my mom would let me skip school the morning of the video game release, for at least for the wrestling games. So I'd end up being at GameStop at the mall, like first thing in the morning, waiting for them to open. Um,
Oh yeah.
Weeks and months leading up to that release, the game magazines, which were a thing back then. Now everything's online,
Oh
but
yeah.
you
I had
see the
strategy games. Yeah.
strategy guides, things like that. They would get released before the game, so you had just a chance to flip through and see what exactly you were going to be dealing with. And this was the beginning of like a groundbreaking video game, which is funny now looking back. They have their square head, like golden eye style, like, sprites, I guess you call them. But yeah,
Remember the
definitely
voiceover
fun one.
stuff. I remember this was the first game that had I believe the first game. Maybe there was other games where if you attacked your opponent, they had like little voiceovers of like The Rock or Ken Shamrock. They'd be like, oh, 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 like making noise or saying stuff like talking smack, like Triple H would talk smack or something. But I remember that being a big part of the game, which now looking back at it, WWF Warzone in the scheme of things was not that great of a game. But when it came out, of course, we didn't know any better, and we thought it was groundbreaking. As we move into or stay right in 1998. Also, at the same time, THQ had put out WCW Nitro. I actually owned this game for PC. I was a little bit of a PC gamer, and the cool thing about it, actually, as I look all around, like someone's behind me here, as I look for this thing, it's pretty cool. This actually came with the video game here. This cool what do you call that? A hologram. It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
WCW Nitro. I thought that was pretty groundbreaking for the time. Um, the game, I actually enjoyed this game a little bit more than Warzone. Sorry, got a lot of things going on over here. I enjoyed this game a little bit more than Warzone. I thought there was more playability. You had more moves. Before you select your guy, you could click on a button and they could cut a little promo. They kind of piggybacked off this with WCW Nitro, kind of the same type of game, released in 1998 as well. I
I
don't know.
believe
Anything you?
Nitro was only either PlayStation or PC because that's around the same time that we saw Aki and THQ come out with this gem, WCW NWO versus the World, which was a super fun game as well. And I remember this was 64 exclusive at that point. So depending on which system you had a lot of different options too in gameplay. I never actually got too much into Nitro. I was more on the Nintendo 64 end of the PlayStation Wars or the PC. I never got in any PC stuff. So I was a 64 guy. So getting into those games instead was like a whole new world. I would say those were very gameplay heavy, where you were still dealing with those block type figures. Maybe their face would look somewhat like the actual guy, but you were dealing with a lot of robotic, stylings in terms of graphics and whatnot. So
I remember that was like the first game though that you could actually have a good match. You could actually like work a decent match with my friends. But you had mentioned N64 and WCW NWO Revenge. That came out in November of 1999. This was really a groundbreaking game because at this point, when that had been released, this was kind of where you could really get into the customizing of the matches and customizing of your created player, and it gave you a lot of playability. The gameplay was really awesome, and it kind of sparked the next few games that I'm going to mention: WWF Wrestlemania 2000, which also came out for N64. Same thing, THQ and Aki basically ghosted WCW Revenge. It's the same exact thing. And yes, there it is, WrestleMania 2000. And to piggyback off that, probably the greatest wrestling game of all time. I think we would probably both agree. If not, our second place video game would be right there, right after it, would be WWF's release of No Mercy in November of 2000. It is actually one of N64's best-selling games of all time. And why don't you fill us in a little bit about No Mercy? Because I know you actually played the game a little bit more than me. I had to borrow an N64 from somebody just to play this game. So I know you've played it for many, many years.
well, now you had mentioned 2000 was the time that No Mercy had come out. Before I get into that, I do want to bring up this one, where if you're avid in your Japanese, of course, you know that says Virtual Pro Wrestling 2. This was released in Japan. This was the New Japan and All Japan Pro Wrestling version of essentially these No Mercy and AKI THQ games. So it was the same basic gameplay with all of Japan's characters. So if you had the means to get it, it was like $100 back in the time to have it shipped here to the states. And then you had to go through and translate everything. So it was a lot of work to play it, but it was a ton of fun. But it was the same models and roster, not roster, excuse me, but the same gameplay and everything as these uh, state versions of the games, and of course, we're talking about No Mercy. This game was groundbreaking. We had the first ladder match. We had you could do different, tag ladder matches, things, steel cage, tag cage, things like that. But the rosters available in these games, even from the WWF versus WrestleMania 2000, all the way up through the WCW ones, it was amazing people they could fit in for the roster. And I thought Revenge actually did the greatest job. You had everybody from the opening card guys, like the lower level guys and Raven's Flock, all the way up to your top tier main event guys, your Hogans and your Goldbergs and whatnot. So
Yeah.
definitely contrasting. Look back even just a few years where you were lucky if you had 8 or 12 guys in a game, then you had to make do with that limited roster style. But here you could, if you wanted to go ahead and be creative, you could, have a storyline for the Billy Kidmans and the Lodies of the world. And then you work your way up, and you have your main event style guys too. So a lot of fun gameplay, a lot of fun matches we had in these later years, and the 64 games still hold up today, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people online that still play that game. How about this story mode? Because I know it had a very in-depth story mode. What could you share with us on the story mode of some of these games? More
Sure.
specifically, No Mercy.
Right. I think it was No Mercies. If I'm thinking back right, it was either this one or 2000, WrestleMania 2000. But they had kind of like a branching system where, depending on your wins or losses or your choices in the match, you'd move to a different story throughout the linear path that would end you at WrestleMania, which was also very unique and added a lot of replayability to it. Because a lot of these games you can only do the same matches so many times without just getting a little boring and repetitive. So that added a great level of newness to wrestling video games altogether with these story modes.
Yes, definitely. And this was kind of the start of the story mode type. Um, I feel like the early 2000s or right after this time, there was also a little bit of lull in the action. So we hit this climax where all these games were released that were really good, and then we kind of hit a little lull in the action. At least on my end or my view, we had 2000s release later, ECW Revolution. I was really excited about the game. I was kind of a little bit let down about that, as well as Anarchy Rules, depending on what system you had as well. You could play those games. I know the first SmackDown also, or yeah, the first SmackDown I think came out. That was a little bit better, but still a little clunky for me.
Yeah, no, and those ECW games too. Not to cut you off, they were essentially the Acclaim video games, the Warzone and Attitude era, or the Attitude video game. Um, that gameplay with the ECW characters. There really wasn't much development in terms of just anything new from that game. So if you had played Attitude, you essentially played Anarchy Rules and whichever the Hardcore Revolution, I think it was called. Same game, didn't really add a whole lot. I think they tried to get creative and they did like a dumpster match where you had to throw your opponent in the dumpster. It came out really cheesy. And for graphics, in terms of graphics, I don't think it was where it could have been at that point in time. But ECW had a couple of video games, so give them props there.
Yeah, just wanted to mention that they did have some success. Well, some success with the video games. Wasn't one of them really had like a really weird grappling system? I feel like one.
Real, yeah, that entire Acclaim series of games I thought was very weird, where it was more like the Mortal Kombat style of like down left B X would give you a headlock. Like you had to memorize almost like a linear path of a control scheme to do one move instead of just left and B or left and A is a certain move. So they were almost too complicated for their own good. So that would also lead to a lot of punch kick matches. Just easier to spam that than it would be to remember left down up six B. Like nobody remembers that. It's hard to
And I
work that in
same thing
match.
with the finishers, and the same thing
Yeah,
with the finishers. I remember, and I think that's what I was talking about with SmackDown was like that too. And I was like, is this too much? The grappling system had not really developed yet. We got into the early 2000s. However, we got lucky with a couple of great games and talking about the advanced grappling system that you could use. And of course, the format for that would be SmackDown Shut Your Mouth. I know we played this game to death. It looks like it's been played a lot. You could build your own storylines. Like you're saying, you have different paths you could choose. We had the draft, which was awesome. We had Brock Lesnar in the game, of course. We had Hogan, Triple H. The backstage area, the interactive backstage area, was pretty cool. So this game was pretty groundbreaking at the time. But then it led to if not the greatest, maybe the second greatest wrestling game of all time. One that I haven't played so recently, but I was playing somewhat currently, even though the game is it's about 16 years old right now. We have Here Comes the Pain. Here Comes the Pain. The story mode was really good. You had new match types that included the Elimination Chamber, and of course we have THQ and Ukes that were on board with this one. This came out actually in October of 2003. I know we got this game like the second it came out. We were like midnight release. You know, we were out there trying to get our hands on these games. Some heated games that we had against each other. We won't go into that. Broken controllers and things.
Any a broken controller.
What could you share with us on those two games? Shut Your Mouth and Here Comes the Pain. Classics, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is when really the evolution really began to take hold. I feel like you because it was graphics meets gameplay, which for the longest time before that, you were lucky if you got one or the other.
Right.
The old WCW THQ version style, I would say these were a 10 on gameplay, maybe a 6 with graphics. You know, just that blocky style. It was hard to get into that. But if you were more of a gameplay guy, you didn't really care. Whereas some people maybe on the PlayStation end of things thought the sprites on a Nitro looked way better, and they didn't really care about the gameplay. It was a little clunky, but whatever. But for these, the Shut Your Mouth and Here Comes the Pain, that SmackDown style of video game, just brought it all together. And the same thing, it had a high roster, a high level of talent for the roster. And then really for a while they would only be adding and adding for a while where maybe we were lucky at first to have 60 guys in a game. Now we're up to hundreds, and they seem to have the space for it all. So the variety is there, the playability is there, the graphics are there, and the gameplay's there. So for me, we're definitely hitting that stride. And of course, we'd have some stinkers in between. Every couple of years they come out with one that's either just a complete reboot of last year's with updated characters, or just for whatever reason they tried something new and it didn't hit. But this is around that time where I felt like things were really evolving for the better in the video game world.
Yeah, like you said, this is where now gameplay and graphics come together. Of course, I really enjoyed the grappling system in this one. I kind of wish they would go back to it. The reversing and everything like that was just very intense. Also featured the bra and panties match for the first time. I wanted to throw that in there. So after the SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, we got to see the Raw or SmackDown versus Raw, kind of more of the same. There really wasn't anything that new or groundbreaking on these games. So I'll kind of just brush over them because I know they came out year after year. However, the one that gets high praise, and I'm not gonna have to go back and play it just to see what the big stink about it was. Of course, we're still dealing with THQ and Ukes, but was SmackDown vs. Raw 2006. This is the one that gets the highest acclaim online,
Hmm.
and I have to go back and check it out. I know this was a pretty John Cena heavy time period. Of course, we've got Cena on the cover and Batista, but I have to go back and check out and see what made still use the same grappling system, the same type of games, the same type of created mode, and the same graphics because we're still dealing with PS2. Um, so as we move away from the PS2, we had Xbox and Xbox One. As we look at the 2012 was the first year of the 2K series. I know we're not really the biggest 2K fans. We continue to own many of the games, but they're very glitch heavy. So now we're getting great graphics. Almost looks like you're watching the actual match, but now the gameplay is suffering. The best one from this time frame, I'll just loop them all together. We're in 2020 now. 2014 seems to get the highest praise. We both like 19. 20, I heard, had a lot of glitches as well. 19 has a lot of glitches. And it just seems like they just mass produce these games. They push them out so fast. They don't take time to make a good game and have a lot of testers go through and make sure there aren't all these glitches that they come out with.
Right. Yeah. No, that's unfortunately in the world of make sure you're pumping it out every year. They haven't had the luxury to build a game the right way. And really, we're actually seeing that even still current day is with a small team like RetroSoft, who's coming out with RetroMania. This is a game that unfortunately it's been delayed for the better part of 2020. And of course, a lot of that's going to be due to COVID related things. But that's a small team. over there. So we're not dealing with like an Acclaim or a THQ where they probably have the right amount of people to deal with whatever problems are going to arise. But sometimes you're dealing with a smaller company like these guys over at RetroSoft, and I think the fans are shitting on them unfairly. Um, game's still in progress. It's still in production. We're going to see it. There hasn't been this much done to it at this point that there's really even that much left. So I say back off, give them a couple more months here, and let's see what they can come up with. But the same thing though, like you said, the glitches. It's been glitch heavy, and that comes down to having to pump it out. I'd much rather they wait 18 months. Every 18 months, you're putting out a new game, and you have that last 6 months to really test and make sure things are smooth. Because that's what we're looking for as gamers at this point, is that graphics meets gameplay. You're not going to impress anybody anymore with one or the other. We have the technology out there to build great games, and like you said, they look just like you're watching WrestleMania on TV. So if that part's already there, put more into the gameplay at this point, and more into the testing and the developing. Um, but for the most part, I think they're still fun and enjoyable. I didn't actually play 20, maybe just a handful of times over at Buddy's house. We're still playing 19 at this point. Here we are going on what would be 2021. They skipped this year as they went more arcade style with Battlegrounds. I don't know if I'm even going to want to play that one. It just doesn't seem like it would be a fun play for me. But really, we're still just playing 2019 because that was probably the better game of that or the year afters in 2020. So
Yeah, I agree. And the 2K series is like known for their glitches. They put out a lot of the sports heavy games. I definitely miss the THQ days, and I mean they're still using Ukes, but I don't know. The games just really suffered, and they put weird things in the game that they think are gonna sell, I guess, and it's just like why. Kind of getting away from the 2K. I wanted to mention WWF All Stars. A lot of people like to play that arcade style. If we go back before that, we had the Def Jam. Remember Def Jam? It's not necessarily a wrestling game, but it was kind of a wrestling game. What was it called? Def Jam.
Vendetta was one of them, I think, or
Yeah, then there was like a thug something. I forgot. But
oh,
those games, they get high praise online, so we wanted to mention a few of those in there. You mentioned the RetroSoft team. Be patient with them. Like you said, they're taking the time to put out a quality product. It's a small team. I'm happy that they're taking the time and getting all the glitches out and still saying, hey, we have to change this move or that move. They're literally nitpicking it that much. If you follow their videos that are being released, we might get a little inside sneak peek with some of their stuff. As we know a few of the team members over there, we look forward to possibly getting one of them on the show and maybe talking a little bit more about the game as it nears its release here. But yeah, that's about it. That's about all I had for the video games. Is there any other games that you could think of that you could throw in that were that we may have skipped over? I know we kind of jumped around a little bit.
yeah, no, that's all right though. I feel like honorable mention needs to go to the Fire Pro games. Those were Japan exclusive essentially, or for the real nerdy video game player here, much like my VPW2. If you had it imported and translated, some of those games were super fun too. But those were gameplay heavy games, just like we talked about. The graphics really weren't much. There you go. There was the actual American release version of the game. I think that was Fire Pro Returns. Yeah,
Yep, this is the returns. Yep.
yeah, that was the same style of game. With the weird camera angle, with that Japanese camera angle.
Isometric, yes, isometric view is a little weird if you can get used to it.
Right, yeah, but the gameplay wise, thousands of moves, just complete customization. So I feel like those kind of games, those definitely need to have an honorable mention 10 list or anything. But no, I think going back, I'd have to say the No Mercies and the Revenge. Those games were some of the most fun games I had played. But now into the 2K era, we still have some fun with those too, and we were able to put on better matches and things like that. It's a whole lot of different variables to them. But I think overall, I'm waiting. Hopefully, we're going to see next year they're getting back to the 2K line of more realistic gaming. So hopefully, whatever bugs they had in 20, they'll be able to have a good 2 year span to work everything out and come out with something spectacular. But yeah, that's pretty much that's going to do it for me. Also, I think we've pretty much touched on everything. We've kind of moved along from the 8-bit NES days and Atari all the way up to where we're at now with the plethora of graphics and gameplay availability into the 4K era of television and gaming. So
Yeah, I just hope that the the playability matches the graphics someday. Someday we get to that point where we can bridge that again, like we did in the early 2000s, where we can look at that. Because I really like this game too, that you mentioned, just from the graphics obviously are like, oh my god. But there you could have up to 300 characters. They had actually 300 characters in the game. You could do barbed wire matches. It was the first game where you could have like 8 guys in the ring at once. So there was a lot of groundbreaking stuff. But of course, if you weren't really heavy into the wrestling video games and didn't know that this was released, in Japan, or this was the American version, or any of them, like you pulled out from N64. I had never seen that game before. I know that it was like the godfather of that series of the No Mercies and stuff like that in WrestleMania. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think that puts the finishing touches on this week's episode. Sig, what are we going to have next week for our fans?
Yeah, next week we talked about it a little bit ahead of time. We had some good response on the Lucha Underground show, that introductory episode. So we're gonna go ahead and move into season 2. Next week's gonna be a recap of Ultima Lucha season 1, which is like the WrestleMania, the big season end of season 1, and we're gonna tie that into the ups and downs of season 2. And at that point, we're gonna be halfway through the entire season. So we'll see where that brings us. But yeah, next week, look forward to Lucha Underground Season 2 introductory recap type show. We'll get into some of our favorite characters, favorite matches from Season 2, and go from there. But yeah, thanks for everybody for checking in. Feel free to subscribe and like on YouTube and Facebook. We're probably the most active, but we'll try to get around to Instagram every once in a while as well. So wherever you're active, send us a message, and we'll take your thoughts and concerns into consideration, and try to keep pumping out this A+ product we got every week here.
Yes, thanks again, and thanks for watching once again. Don't forget to like and subscribe on this week's edition. Thanks again, Sig. This is the East-West Connection